Hello and welcome to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. We're here to explore the intricacies of leadership, explore the science behind it, and hopefully learn a few things along the way. I developed the Pivot framework to help change work environments for the better. Pivot uses neurological science to help leaders understand their colleagues and analyse their own feelings and responses. All in all, we aim to enhance mental well-being, improve performance, and benefit everyone involved. So what does pivot mean? To pivot, you need perseverance, inclusion, value, optimisation and trust. With my guests, we'll unpick these principles and discuss how each one is vital in building strong leaders. In this episode, I'm joined by Hannah Harvey. Today, we are diving into a sensitive yet important topic: how to support team members who may be going through a divorce. The UK divorce rate reveals that approximately 42% of marriages end in divorce, so that must account for a large population of the workforce, I am absolutely sure. Hannah is the author of How to Divorce Sober. In her book, she not only talks about managing the emotional and practical aspects of divorce, but she also talks about how to approach it in a healthy and mindful way. We'll explore how leaders can better support employees go through divorce and create a resilient and compassionate workplace. Not only is Hannah a published author, she is also an experienced mentor, yoga instructor, and podcast host of Happily Ever After, addressing issues from addiction to mental health. Previously, Hannah created content for major brands through her Mum's Days blog, including John Lewis, Tesco, and Argos. We're going to be chatting about how to optimise your teams during difficult times and some of the things that have helped her through her divorce. This sounds like a powerful and insightful podcast, and I can't wait to get stuck in. Welcome to the podcast, Hannah. Can you introduce yourself a bit more and tell us about your work?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. So I feel like you've covered almost everything there. It's mostly women that I work with, but obviously I know lots of men go through this too. And I support people through online courses and yoga retreats and things like that, just to kind of help people to recenter themselves, because it's such a chaotic, traumatizing time that, it's just crazy. I can tell you that. You cannot underestimate how much it impacts people's mental health to go through this kind of thing in their life. It's huge.
Yeah. And I find it quite interesting because in the workplace, it's not an easy topic to address. You know, if a lot of people go around the workplace, don't want to talk about it, it's obviously very private. Then we have more people in the workplace who want to share to get that support, but then struggle to contain that so they can stay optimised at work and do the job that they're trying to do. So we see all different kinds of reactions to the divorce process. And it's not a similar journey for anyone, really. But I think that it's a really important topic to cover today, because what I'm seeing in my leadership development is when we have to have these more trickier conversations, they become quite difficult, and divorce seems to be a bit of a taboo subject. So I wanted to kind of just shine a light on that and invite you in, because I saw that you just published your first book, How to Divorce Sober. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my book it's kind of part memoir, what it was like to actually go through divorce. But the other element of what I share in the book is the fact that I also quit drinking exactly 7 years ago, and the impact that this kind of addictive tendencies, unless you deal with why you were doing whatever it was in the first place, it can pass on to other things. And that includes things like drama within a relationship, the usual sugar, coffee. So I wanted to explore this idea of addictions through relationships and the impact it can really have on you, and then how you recover, basically.
Wow. So you talk about approaching divorce with clarity and sobriety. Yeah, my eyebrows are sort of going up because I'm thinking, wow, that's quite a bold statement. Tell me about what you learnt about that for you in your journey, and what you kind of talked about in your book.
Yeah, so what I did first is I quit alcohol. So that was years before I ended up leaving the relationship I was in. And what I discovered is that like I just said, when you quit something, it doesn't mean you're like all of a sudden fixed. Like all of the other reasons behind why you were doing that in the first place shine a light throughout your life, basically. And it's really tricky when you then go into a high conflict situation, such as divorce, to then not lean back on all of these old bad habits. And what I really wanted to do, you know, my life's up in the air anyway, so may as well go all in and find out about all these shadows and work out really what's going on so that hopefully I can come out the other side so much better.
Mm. And I want to talk more about that later on, about how we can use divorce as a platform for development and growth. That would be really cool if we can get to that part of the conversation. So thinking about leaders then, and the work that you've done and the journey that you've been on, how do you think leaders could start to talk about divorce in the workplace? How could they start the conversation?
I think I guess you've got two different types of people. I'm quite honest and open, and I was happy to go in and be like, okay, this thing's happening. Other people are going to go to work and this is their escape. So they might be quite private about what's going on, but that doesn't mean it isn't going on, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about it. So I think it's really about creating that safe container so people know that they can come and speak to you about anything that's going on, but they also don't have to.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And when you were going through this, did you have like a leader or role model who was somebody you could like lean on to talk about your journey?
I think I tried to talk about this a little bit at work, but I also didn't want people thinking I was bringing chaos and drama into the workplace as well.
Mm.
I mean, I started my podcast around that time. So I suppose for me, that was an outlet of being like, okay, this is going on and I'm going to talk about it here. So yeah, it was more leaning on friends outside of the workplace.
Hmm.
But I think, you know, when we have secrets that we feel ashamed of, then that's going to really start to play out in our lives everywhere. So I think if you can start having honest conversations, especially if, you know, as a leader, you've been through this yourself, and you can say, these are the kind of things that happened to me, but I've got over it, then that's when other people are going to start to feel safe enough to open up and say, okay, this is what's happening. Because as soon as you shine a light on that stuff, all of a sudden it's not so scary.
Mm. So yeah, what I'm hearing there is this bit about vulnerability, if you've been through it, and sharing your lived experience to a certain extent, if you can, to build that relationship,
Yeah.
but also kind of respecting the boundaries with that. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the way I would approach speaking to one of my children. You know, it's like, I understand that something's going on because you're not happy right now. I'm here for you, and I would like to engage in this conversation with you, but also not pushing it to the point that you're pushing them away.
Mm. Yeah. So overstepping that. It's a quite hard balance, isn't it, in a leadership role? Because, you know, we have that duty to optimize people in the workplace. We might recognize what's going on for somebody, but it's getting that dialogue going, isn't it? And understanding where people are comfortable with that. Do you have any tips for leaders about how they could go about that? So sort of addressing it with sensitivity and empathy, but getting it right so they can actually get stuck in and help people and optimize them.
Yeah, I would probably say, can you have this conversation outside of the
Well,
workspace?
that's interesting. Yeah.
And then potentially just ask, what is it you need? How can I support you?
Yeah.
You know, and that is when you can start opening up in your own story. It might not be you've got divorced, but it might be that you've done something else that was quite traumatic. You know, it's up there with like obviously grief. Moving house is apparently as stressful as getting divorced. Like all of these big life changes, we've all been through something that can help you connect with somebody who's going through trauma,
Mm.
which is what divorce is. There may be high conflict situation going on for the individual at the time. They might be going to court. And that's not a natural position to be in. It's like you're going through war. It feels like you're on a daily basis being attacked for your at the core of who you are. And it's not a natural state to live in that place. So how can we down-regulate people so that they feel safe to get about, their daily stuff? Like, people have got to work, got to pay these legal bills,
Yeah, right. Got to keep in the job to pay the bills.
Yeah. So how can we create a really safe environment so that you can tell people what's going on? Obviously, you don't want people being too stuck in drama, because that's going to impact everybody around them as well. Maybe you should introduce a yoga class, morning yoga class, so people can get in their bodies and then get to work.
Well, we definitely advocate that as part of our resilience models, and we definitely get you involved in that at some point if you'd be up for that, for sure.
Definitely.
So just sort of rewinding there a little bit, you talked about, it's not a natural state for people to be in, and you give us some insight there into, the divorce process, going to court, etc. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because that isn't something I think people would share in the workplace, but what would be going on behind the scenes. And then that would obviously impact on people's resilience. So we would see people with lower resilience in the workplace as a result. Can you give us more insight into what that was like, or if that was your journey, or what you know from people that you work with around that experience?
So when you are triggered, you'll go into fight or flight in your brain. So fight is obviously like anger. So that means you might be much more confrontational with people. Flight, you just want to hide away and disappear. So people becoming much more reserved and not being their usual selves. And obviously freeze is like fear related. So on a hour by hour basis, if you're in a high conflict situation, you could go through all three of those easily. So I think understanding that if people are not being quite their usual selves, then that's probably because they're going through, this high triggering situation and conflict. And it's deeply, deeply unpleasant. It's not a natural state to be in. So fight, flight, or freeze is not a good space to be. And you need to down-regulate, and you need space to breathe and center yourself and get kind of grounded.
Do you think there's an opportunity here for leaders to be able to create that space then? And how would a leader go about that if they saw somebody showing those types of symptoms in the workplace?
I think if you can encourage, it seems really counterintuitive, but if you can encourage people to slow down and take some time to breathe, then actually you get out of that fight, flight, freeze bit of the brain and then back into actually what is important in this moment in time. And that is the basis of what my kind of online course is how do we do this in practice?
Yeah. Can you give us some insight to that? I'm just keen to know how that would work.
It's a lot of using meditation and meditative techniques to, I mean, it sounds so simple, but if you can just breathe, all of a sudden you're out of the busyness and the chaos of the brain and all of these, what the brain's like for all sorts of different things, but add in somebody's literally attacking you and saying, I want this, that, and the other, or attacking your nature, or perhaps you don't have access to your children in the same way that you did. All of these different things are going on. So it's absolutely terrifying. And your brain's like, oh my God, how are we going to deal with this? So if you can step away from that, get back into breath, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we are safe. We're safe in this moment. It is okay. What is the next step we're going to take, rather than how we're going to solve the next 10 years of our lives, which God knows what it's going to be like.
Yeah. Because our teammates going through divorce at work will have that fear of unknown, won't they? They're going through a major change process, major transition. Yeah.
We all know that change is deeply unsettling, even if it's change for the good. It can feel really unsettling because what feels familiar feels safe in the nervous system. Even if it's not safe. You could be really used to drama and conflict, and that therefore feels safe and feels familiar. And as soon as you move to a place where, it's suddenly calm, that can feel really disconcerting for people. So it's learning how to train your nervous system to go, it's okay now.
And actually, whilst all that is going on, you're still showing up 9 till 5,
Yeah.
sitting at your desk, do or whatever your role might be, trying to deliver your skills, your knowledge, your experience through your job and be the best you can be, whilst your nervous system is tripped off because you're getting divorced.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot,
It is a lot.
actually.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
And they say the average divorce takes apparently 6 months now, but that's just one tiny section of getting divorced. You have to sort out the finances. You also have to agree on the children. So yeah, the bit of paperwork which says you're not married anymore might take 6 months to process, but everything else can take years.
Mm. And I think, I think we minimize that a bit. I'm going to be quite honest. In organizations, I think, like you say, if divorce feels like drama and chaos, so let's not bring it to work. Let's kind of leave it at the door, which I understand. But then we've got this notion of bringing our whole selves to work and showing our true self. And that's tricky when you're going through divorce, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose in a corporate setting, you don't want to be judged for whatever's going on in your life. You'd like to be able to turn up and present your best self. But if you're not looking after the bit of you that needs to shine and sparkle at work, how can you bring your best self? And also, whenever you're vulnerable and you feel heard and seen, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we're okay now. And that's what makes people feel safe.
That's the nervous system regulating then.
Yeah. And you can co-regulate with people as well by just seeing and hearing what they've got to say.
Yeah, it's so interesting. That's that brain to brain dynamic, isn't it? And then all of the kind of neurointelligence that we all have in our bodies coming together with another human to regulate ourselves. That's interesting. So I'm hearing that, we need to be thinking about opening up the dialogue, not avoiding it for sure. Considering it impacts quite a large population of the workforce, there's a need for it. So for us to be able to optimize and our teams to help them perform at their best, we need to go there. I think it's approaching the topic with empathy, as you said, and sensitivity and knowing where the boundaries are. What else can people do to support people going through divorce? So like colleagues around them, the organization as a whole. Have you got any kind of ideas on that?
It's such a tricky one, isn't it? Because everybody's going through something all the time. And at some point, you have to kind of go, right, we are still a business and we are still trying to, get work done. And in many respects, this is an escape for set people going through that kind of thing. At least I can go to work and I can do my job. But yeah, I just think making sure that people know that it is okay to reach out. And if you need maybe a little bit more flexibility in terms of where and when you do your work may be helpful, because there'll be times when, especially as you go into that, now I'm a single parent, basically, there are going to be times when I have to go and pick my children up, and that's all there is to it. And because I'm only seeing them half the week or even less, I'm going to prioritize that, because at the end of the day, our families are the most important things, or they should be, That's how it is definitely how you feel when you're going through that kind of conflict. So I guess a bit more understanding around that, a bit more flexibility, as long as people getting their work done, doesn't matter where you physically are.
That flexibility and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not really heard much of that, to be honest, in terms of people going through divorce and actually explaining that that's what's required. We tend to do that whole head down, get on with it, tap into the grit, push forward, bunker down till the storm passes, and then try and come out of it the other side. And my feeling is that if the workforce continue to do that, then we'll end up with other types of symptoms around performance, the resilience levels, people not dealing with trauma, etc. And optimizing people in the workplace becomes more tricky because we have other kind of symptoms of poor performance that come out in other ways. So for me, I'm quite passionate about doing quite a bit of work in this space and getting it right for people who go through this. Are there any specific strategies or resources that you can recommend for managers to kind of look at if they're thinking about supporting and optimizing their teams that would be going through this?
I think they should read my book.
Well, tell us a bit more about that. What are the strategies in the book?
Well, do you know what? I think one of the biggest things that you should not do is pretend it's not happening and put your head down. But obviously, I'm not the same as everybody, and I'm quite open about all these things. And I've done all the work, I've done the therapy, I've had coaches, I became a yoga teacher off the back of it. You know, I'm happy to go through the shadows to work out where the gold is on the other side. Not everybody's going to want to do that because they're already going through a lot of change. So why invite more of that into your life? But as you say, like the body literally holds trauma. So if you're going through this and pretending it's not going to happen, it is going to show up in other areas of your life or other areas of your health. And mental health, like how many days do people take off for mental health reasons? Because it could be as simple as just having a conversation with your boss so that they know what's going on and you feel seen and held by them. That suddenly frees you up and that trauma's gone. So really, I mean, one of the biggest strategies I have is one, slow down, stop trying to do everything today, stop being so reactive. Because if you respond to anything when you're in your fight flight brain, it's not going to be a very healthy or helpful response. You're either going to be angry or you're going to be running away from your troubles, neither of which is very helpful. So coming back to that place of, right, I've calmed down. I'm going to respond to this tomorrow when I'm feeling much more in control. Then your response patterns are going to be much more helpful and constructive. And I would say that's probably the case for everything at work as well. If your brain is somewhere else worrying about your conflict rather than your work, it's not going to be the best outcome.
Absolutely, yeah. I can really relate to that. And the pivot leadership principles are all linked to neuroscience. So in the optimise class that we do with leaders, we go through what I call a grit and grace model, which I think kind of links to what you're talking about there. So it's at a time where I'm feeling most optimised and my resilience is high and I feel great, I can tap into more grit and deliver more and push forward and look for that extra whatever percent it is that I have that I'm withholding to be my best. But if I'm in a place of trauma, distress, or I'm burnt out because I've been overusing my grit, if you like, then it's about having a grace period and working with the brain in a different way in a coaching setting to release those bliss molecules to eat up the stress hormones and stress molecules that have been released in your body. So it's very similar to what you're talking about there, that whole regulation and helping people regulate.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So what kind of strategies do you use on your course to help regulate that brain? You talked about breathing. Do you have a breathing exercise that's your favorite, or that somebody who may be feeling anxious as they're going through the divorce process can use? Do you have anything like
Am
that?
I allowed to go a little bit woo-woo?
Yeah, I'm inviting you in to do that.
Okay, thank you. I always have to monitor like how magic can I get with these kind of conversations. So I find one of the most helpful things that I have ever done is a cutting the cord meditation. So for example, every time I got a text message from my ex when we were going through the divorce, I would almost have a panic attack, or I would have a panic attack. It didn't matter what it was saying. Just the receiving this kind of message would make me fearful of what it was going to say. And so what I ended up doing was, it's like a guided meditation where you kind of invite the person into the space and you imagine the cord in between you and you see it, you really visualize it, you kind of feel where it is in your body. And then you use whatever tool that you need. Mine was like a blowtorch to cut this cord. And then you imagine the cord like disappearing and then golden light kind of healing the spaces in your body. So it's all very like visualization in the mind, but it is such a game changer in terms of altering the way that you respond to the person going forward. It's like you've put a protective bubble around yourself and somehow the negative energy just really changes your mental state.
That sounds really powerful. Yeah.
Brilliant. I did it with my book as well. When I first got my book, I was like, ugh, I didn't want to hold it or be near it or touch it. For some reason, it really frightened me. So I left it a day because, that's what I do now. And then in the morning, I went into meditation. I'm holding the book and I'm like, okay, what's going on? And I realized I was terrified of what everybody was going to think of my book. And so what I then imagined was there was a cord from me to the book and then all these cords going out to everybody outside of it. And I just cut the cord. And then I was able to bring it into me and be like, okay, this is still me. It is still my thing that I've created. And I now don't feel as fearful of what people are going to say. Like it's not going to really affect me emotionally now or as much.
Yeah, that's a really powerful visualization there. So do you do that kind of in your mind, eyes shut, in a room on your own somewhere? Or can you do it at your desk, just sort of zoning out a bit? Like what
Oh,
what
yeah.
kind of environment you would need to be in to make that work?
I think you could if you have headphones, you could definitely do it at work. Just shut
Okay.
your eyes for a few minutes and do some breathing.
Yeah.
As one of the bonuses for my book, I've done a guided meditation to I think it's like a 20-minute guided meditation to take you through that process.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's available with the book if you want that. There's a
Yeah.
link to it.
Oh, that's cool. We'll get your book in the show notes. And I think for those leaders who need your book because they're going through divorce or because they've got team members going through this and they want to support them and they want to understand what that journey is like or what the potential triggers could be or how they could be showing up at work, I would advocate, obviously, they take a look at your book and look at your strategies. I think that exercise you just talked about there, I've kind of got a vision of someone, working through their day. They kind of just built themselves up from the last setback of part of the divorce process, but they're moving forward, trying to do really well at their job, trying to smash it, and then ping, an email comes in and it's something to do with the divorce. Like you talked about a text, but it's something, like a letter from a solicitor or something, like you say, if it's kids or the other party didn't agree with something that you proposed, whatever it might be, and how that derails people in their working day. And then how there isn't a safe space to kind of get psychologically safe again, to go again. And those kind of exercises you just talked about are quite helpful, I suppose, for people to kind of self-help, but also for managers to signpost to if they see that you could be going through some kind of distress or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so difficult. And some of the other things that I kind of put in place to protect myself once I kind of started to understand more and more about how it was impacting me on a daily basis, I started to create boundaries around when I would communicate around the divorce. So things like, because there were times when I just couldn't sleep because I just received a horrible message or just received something to do with the divorce. And I'd wake up in the night and my subconscious is basically trying to answer emails or reply to messages that have made me angry so it does impact every part of your life. You're not going to sleep as well. So I started creating boundaries around, I will not read emails at all beyond a certain time because otherwise that's going to impact my sleep.
Yeah. That's actually a really good strategy too for people, isn't it? Knowing when to allow the trauma to come to you during your
Yeah.
working day and when not to, and how to optimize yourself in those times when you're out of work.
Because we're used to being available 24/7.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
what I was
like,
thinking.
actually, you don't have to be. So maybe if you kind of expect that from the people in your team, maybe giving a little bit of leeway around, okay, we're probably not going to be able to be in touch as much from 5 p.m. because they've got their kids tonight or they've got a big day tomorrow and I know that they're going to need a good night's sleep. So therefore their emails are going to be off or, it's giving people the permission to not be available 24/7.
And that's the bit that leaders can do, isn't it, with their team members, is give them the permission to do that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we need that outside kind of influence, if you like, don't we? Or that permission to do that for ourselves.
Yeah. And don't feel guilty for doing it because it's literally self-preservation. A lot of the time during a divorce, you're in survival mode.
Mm.
So how can I self-preserve what I can? The things I can control is when you communicate with me. If it's really urgent, call my mum and she's allowed to call me, that kind of thing. But otherwise, I'll deal with it in the morning.
This is really interesting. I'm loving how it's actually it's not about being passive. Us as leaders have got to try not to be passive when divorce presents in the workplace with somebody, and actually be quite proactive and active within the conversation about it. And I think we need to work towards normalizing this a little bit for people to talk about it, because it isn't, is it? You've normalized it. You've managed to do that by writing your book. How did you do that? Like, how did you overcome that?
Oh, do you know what? I didn't really have a lot of choice. It was one of those projects where I was like, oh, this idea is not going to leave me alone until it's out of me. So yeah, I got to the end of the divorce, got the divorce papers, and I'm like, oh man, that was really awful. I feel like I need to share the good bits and the things that I have got from it, so people know that they're not on their own with this, because it's such a lonely, isolating experience. But like you say, 42%, and in numbers, that is 80,000 people a year getting divorced.
Wow. I didn't even do the numbers.
In the UK.
It's crazy.
Yeah. The average age of a woman is basically 35 to 49. Men are slightly older.
Optimum working age, though, right?
Yeah, this is the workforce we're talking about, and they're, in survival mode for potentially up to 3 years of their life.
Yeah.
That's like breakdown territory.
It is. It absolutely is. And there are multiple divorces, right? So we might not only go through this once. So what else can we do in the work environment? You talked about yoga, potential yoga interventions, but there isn't really kind of a process, or we've got, the mental health agenda that supports people in the workplace to help optimize them. We've got menopause, we've got men's mental health, women's, etc. We've got lots of resilience kind of interventions. There isn't a divorce intervention. So if you were going to package one up, like a 1, 2, 3, these are my 3 things that organizations could do to signpost and support people in a robust way to make workplaces more compassionate and empathetic towards people going through this, what would that look like? What would that package look like for organizations?
Oh, what a package.
I know.
That sounds fun.
We're going to innovate one, clearly, from this.
I'm going to turn up outside workplaces with some kind of like luxury van so people can come and just cocoon in there. Because one of the things when you feel overstimulated is you want to cocoon yourself and get really small and like remove all of the external distractions. So if there is some way in the middle of the day where, like, not even yoga, just doing some breathing exercises will completely transform how people feel when they come back. So having these quieter spaces where people can go and sit at lunchtime, where they're almost in their own little pod. I'm now like, I don't know if this is the thing that people do, but
I think that you need to diagnose what organizations need, and then it needs to be created. So let's do that on this podcast today. So a cocoon space.
I would like to cocoon somewhere with, you can put your headphones on and just breathe for half an hour if that's what you need. And then also just knowing that it's okay to not be okay, and to potentially request much more flexibility about where you work during these times of high conflict. And I think opening up the dialogue, because I just imagine, like, whenever I try and talk to my teenager, it's like he needs that invitation to open up. So just keep inviting people, keep opening up and inviting people to share what they're going through if they want to. But obviously, if you don't want to, that's fine too. But if you don't have that invitation, it's a bit like, oh, they asked me once and now I feel like I can't bring it up.
Yeah, I missed my chance to come to the party.
Yeah, I've missed my chance.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have to pretend it's not happening now.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. So cocoon, so space for people to regulate or desensitize because they are going to be overstimulated. We know that. So we're looking for that, but we need to create space for them to do that. Open up the dialogue and keep inviting the dialogue. That's super important for leaders to do.
And that flexibility piece.
And the flexibility. to help people sustain their jobs, because I know sustaining your job is one of the most important factors when you're getting divorced, because that's about identity, security, financial. So those things are super important. This has been a great chat, and I can't wait to read your book properly. I've skimmed it, obviously. I know there's some great strategies in there to help people. We'll definitely get it in the show notes. Where can people find out more about you?
So I have a website, which is hannahharvey.uk. And then my main place I live is Instagram. So that's at Hannah Harvey UK. I do have a Substack and I do have a LinkedIn. So you can find me on those as well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on such a complex and sensitive topic.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think leaders and managers will really take a lot away from our conversation today, and some practical tools in there. So that's super important for them to help with their teams. For those who are listening, be sure to check out Hannah's book, How to Divorce Sober, for even more guidance. You can find it in the show notes and on her Instagram. Until next time, let's continue to pivot in our leadership so we can optimise our teams and foster resilient and compassionate workplaces. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. For any information on anything we've discussed in this episode, head down to the show notes. You'll also find my Pivot scorecard there, so you can take the test and see what your Pivot score is right now. Don't forget to like, rate and share the podcast and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.